Emulation has had a huge surge in popularity recently, what with the release of apps like Delta for iOS, for example, bringing all of these systems to your handheld phone. However, dedicated devices that are designed for retro game emulation have always remained popular and relevant for at least a few years now. And more so, handheld devices like this, the one that I'm holding right here is the RG35XX-H, the mouthful that it is, which retails for about $50 on a good day. Now, this makes it close to being a value champion, which could only be beaten by something like the TrimUI Smart Pro, for example, which has its own flaws. But this one device can comfortably emulate all the way up to PlayStation 1 and some PSP games even, which for the price that you pay for it has been an amazing deal. Especially me having grown up around the millennium around these PlayStation 1 and Game Boy games. This has been a wonderful companion to have on my commutes, and just to keep my hands off my phone and on these tactile buttons, it's really satisfying and makes the time pass without much worry. Now, historically, the only thing that's held these devices back has been, aside from its horrible analog sticks, by the way, has been its operating system, the one that's been released by its manufacturer, which from what I know has been based on an older version of Ubuntu and it runs 32-bit binaries. This device has a 64-bit processor. It's a dual core, I think. It has about a gigabyte of RAM as well, and it has its own dedicated GPU. And this GPU has been the source of many problems because the device drivers for that GPU, I think, have only been available in 32-bit from the manufacturer. But there are open source solutions. Even a couple months back, Ambinic had made a few changes to the operating system, which made it almost outperform all the custom firmware solutions out there, which, by the way, the community has been hard at work making some really wonderful solutions for this device. The the stock OS, and in particular the modded stock OS, is something that I've always liked and supported on this, mainly because if someone is new to the hobby and doesn't really know their way around Linux, they're not going to spend a lot of time tinkering with the device. They buy a device just to have fun and play games on it. You don't really want to spend hours and hours messing with the device to get the things running. So I've always been on Team Stock OS and Stock Mod. However, recently, Anthony has gone and done a major oopsie, if you would say so. A couple days back, they finally moved to 64-bit binaries. Actually, no. A couple days back, they moved the system over to 64-bit and added support for 64-bit binaries. In my testing, however, what I found was that most of the binaries in the device still are running on 32-bit and with notably worse performance. So we're going to be exploring this. And if you had noticed, since the 64-bit version, the 64 gigabyte, yeah, the 64 gigabyte image for the update of the system has mysteriously disappeared. So what's going on there? It is also something I wanted to discuss today. Now, before I updated, I did take a couple looks, and the first thing I looked at was the analog sticks on the old firmware. I did get a little bit excited because I read somewhere that Anvenic had in between updated their button drivers, which are currently the biggest suspicion behind the horribly snappy analog sticks, which also apparently is a point of contention in the community because people are getting really upset over this. But it really isn't a hardware issue, so I did check this first for cardinal snapping. I also went through the menus for RetroArch and PPSSPP, which seemed to tell me that they were 32-bit binaries, which isn't the end of the world, but I imagine we are missing out on some improvements and leaving a little bit of performance on the table, which lower-end devices could use. Now, I recorded this when the 64 gigabyte image was still up there, so I'll be using that one for the install. The first thing you download is this 48 gigabyte file. Realize that this isn't really the image that goes into the drive. Uncompress it. Realize that you need about 100 gigabytes of storage. And finally get the image. Now this one can be run into Rufus and it takes another eternity to finally get it on your SD card. Now while that is going, I did want to talk about one more problem with the stock operating system, and that is that it can't really work with different sized SD cards. The reason is that the file Ambinic provides you is a one-to-one copy, right? An image of an actual 64 gigabyte SD card somewhere. And the way that partitioning works in the stock operating system is that the ROMs partition, as you can see once this is done here, The ROM's partition is way to the left, right? And it's supposed to be at the right end. This is because partitions can only be extended to the right. And if you want more room for your ROMs, for example, like 128 or 256 gigs, you can't really have that when it's at the left because you can't really push it anywhere. There's other partitions in the way. We will be using the mod to fix this later on, which is pretty much the only way to fix this right now. Once the updated image was flashed onto the SD card, I plugged it in, turned it on, and did a little bit of housekeeping. And I went straight to check for any improvements on the analog sticks. And from my findings, I think that they're actually a little bit worse than they were. I don't know if this is possible, and I might be seeing things here, especially after calibration. Now, what you see on the left is the software, and what you see on the right is what is being received by the system. From what I know, this could be a calibration issue on a kernel level for the raw values that are being input. I did give it a couple of stress tests. I ran God of War on PPSSPP, which not everybody likes for benchmarking, but I do. It does have the frame skip as well as a cheat, which is basically a configuration to run at 30 FPS. And it seems to be notably worse than what I had before. I do have a video on my channel where I benchmarked this game previously. You can take a look. But yeah, I'm not really surprised, but I am a bit disappointed. So yeah, there's that. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but PPSSPP still seems to be running on a 32-bit binary, as well as RetroArch. I gave that one a stress test as well with Mario Golf, which, yeah, it's not known for running well, so no one's expecting any miracles there. But in my findings, nothing great. So, and in case you've never had this device before, I just want to mention that the games that I'm testing here are the ones that are known to run the worst. So they're good benchmarks. But of course, there are games that run amazing on this, and it can give you hours upon hours of fun. So this really isn't a slight on the device itself, but just trying to see if there's been any improvements on the more difficult games to emulate. Let's talk about the harbor-sized elephant in the room. This tiny device can now play PC games pretty much straight from the factory, which is insane if you ask me. All of this is thanks to the hard work of a team working on a project called Podmaster, who have been working for many months now on porting all of these PC games to these Linux handhelds. Now, this has been on custom firmware for quite a while now, but as someone who's never had the time to invest in installing one of them, this has been my first exposure to PC games on this tiny handheld, and it's been amazing. It's like the same feeling that I had when I first realized this device could play all the way up to the PlayStation 1, which I grew up with, and now I can also play my favorite games on the go, which is insane. Let's talk a little bit about the controversy surrounding this topic, and in particular, what Ambenic decided to do recently, which is also the reason why the 64 GB image is now off the internet, by the way. They decided it was a bright idea to, because Podmaster works on the 64-bit system now, right? They decided it was a great idea to go ahead and package some pirated, or let's just say copyrighted versions of some newer games, some as new as like 2 years old. And maybe it's best if I don't mention the names, but they went ahead and packaged these games, PC ports, along with the Podmaster, the files, and they shipped it along with the new image for their stock operating system. Understandably, this has pissed a lot of people off, and this has breached the trust of the Podmaster team, who have put in a lot of voluntary work towards this project and making sure these games are playable in our handheld devices. The team has to go through a lot that we don't see. Like, it's not just coding, right? They have to talk to the developers and make sure that they have the permissions to get everything running. And what this has done is like really jeopardize their sustainability and longevity in the scene, the Portmaster team. So what happened was the members of the community have reached out. They were able to communicate with the team at Ambenic, and they have voiced their concerns. And Ambenic went ahead and removed their 64 GB image, which is why it's off the internet, and new people are really confused about why it's not present anymore. So this actually pulls in a larger topic, right, about emulation itself, which has always been in a legal gray area. And people are pushing forward this scene with the understanding that people already own the games that they want to emulate. And when it comes to newer games like this, just pushing copies of that along with another team's stolen work is just straight up bad for everybody involved. Now, in the interest of preserving the ability to run the ports on the stock operating system, and mainly for the benefit of the people who may not be able to switch to custom firmware for any reason, but still want to be able to play their favorite ports on their RG35XX-H, against my better judgment, I did spend the past few days trying to get these ports working on the stock operating system. Now, I must confess the modder for the stock mod, CBEPXMe, has a few launch scripts of their own bundled with a few more copyrighted material which I don't want to share. But I did take my liberties with their scripts, which helped me to understand a lot about how things work in the stock operating system in comparison to the custom ones. I was working by myself without any support. I also realized that if we want this to remain as a possibility for a longer term, it might not be the best idea to be bundling copyrighted material along with your scripts. The Portmaster team has always been against piracy, and I think it's in everyone's interest to honor their policies regarding this. So to start, I did open up the image that Anbanic provides to try and find out where Portmaster is, and to my delight, it was exactly where it should be, as in every other firmware. But some of the files are already bundled, meaning that we won't be using the Portmaster installer to get the games running. Not being able to use the Portmaster installer means that we need to be manually managing a few files to get the games running. And for the first game, I picked a Potris, which is one of my favorite games lately, which is a great way to play Tetris. And the best part is that it's free and it's built for literally Portmaster. So I thought this would be a great place to start. I took a look at the launch scripts and also went through the ones that were bundled with Anbanex's image and made a few changes that I thought would work. It took a while, but it did eventually run, and all I needed to do after that was just change the aspect ratio in game, and it was running perfectly. For some reason, Anbanek decided that this game wasn't worth bundling with their software. After this, I decided to try and get a couple games working which required more files. Now, these are the games which you would legally need to own on a platform such as Steam, and you would need to use the Steam console to download some specific versions of the game, which are the only ones which would run with Portmaster, by the way. The first one I decided was Stardew Valley, but more on that later. For now, let's move on to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Now, this is a game that came a couple of years ago, and it's actually insane that it runs on this device. But with a few changes to the launch scripts, again, we are able to get it running almost perfectly on the stock operating system. Now, most of these scripts are now on my GitHub, so in case you need to change, all you have to do is download the game from Portmaster, add the files that you need, follow the instructions on the Portmaster website, and all you have to do is just replace the launch script with the one that is on my GitHub. And if all works well, it should be perfect. Now, about Stardew Valley. Getting this game to work took a good 4 or 5 hours out of the prime of my life, and we had to start with the instructions on the Portmaster website, which tells you that you just need the game version from Steam. And it wasn't working initially, and I did a little more digging, and I found that there's only one certain compatibility version that was made for Linux, which works, and for that you need this manifest number. And when you get that working on Steam, you can go one step further. But yeah, it's I've spent way too much time on this game trying to get it to work, and in the end, I did end up giving up. Last but not least, let's go through the process of modding your device. Basically, the way of getting a modded stock on your device, which until now has been my favorite way of running this device, mainly because it is fully compatible with the stock operating system and just makes a few changes that improve the device objectively. Like it can do automatic partitioning, And it also supports things like SSH so that you can remotely control your device from your computer. If you want to make many changes, this is quite useful, though in practice it has been a little unstable for my uses. So all you have to do is go to Google and search for this user, and it should take you to their repository. I'm choosing not to link this because as of now, I think there is still some copyrighted material on there, and I really don't want to be associated with that. But all you have to do is go here, and usually all you need to do is use the update package that is over here. But of note is that this will only work with the latest version of stock, and most likely you might not have it. So in any case, it's just better to reflash the whole SD card. So you would download the image here, which is only 2 GB, and you just go through the same procedure again. You get a smaller file this time. You use Rufus, you get it on your SD card, and this time when you turn on your device, once the flashing is done, you should run into this screen, which should create the ROM's partition at the right place. Now, once that is done, you will have a few short questions to answer. So go ahead and pick here or just go for defaults, which is what I recommend. And now when you plug your SD card into your PC, you might need to mount the partition. You will find that it is now in the right place. And at this point, it can be extended as much as you like or shrunk as much as you want, because you can use the rest of the storage on your card now. Okay, so in conclusion, I know you're not here to listen to my opinion, but from what I can see, right, what we have here is an update that from the get-go stepped on a lot of people's toes, ended up leaking quite a bit of pirated games, which are still out there, by the way. To their credit, Anvenic did decide to try and fix the situation by taking down these offending images. Even objectively speaking, right, what we have here is an update which has, sure, 64-bit libraries, and maybe it would help bring Portmaster officially to the stock operating system. But for what we have now, what we have is a bit subpar performance for RetroArch and PPSP. Like, they're still on 32-bit binaries from what I've seen, from what I've found, and we are still leaving quite a bit of performance on the table, and we don't even know if there was a battery bug that was introduced in the previous update, if it is here or not, because like the release notes are a bit vague and they're not very communicative. So yeah, sure, we do have one or two ports that work on stock OS now, and it might be possible to get more working, but at this point the real question is it even worth it? Because the effort that I had to put into getting one or two games working on the stock operating system, I think might actually be much better spent towards just getting a proper version of a custom firmware installed, which I reckon it's much easier than what I had to do, because I'm working with no support, right? Like I'm thinking about a member who's just joined the community, who doesn't have their feet in Linux, who doesn't know everything about what's going on. They might not be able to find the resources and the support that they need, especially on stock OS. Now that they've even gone ahead and pissed off many of the developers, it might finally be time for even the last few of us who really like mod stock to maybe jump over and explore the custom formats, which are improving by the day. Like, we have newer options, we have MUS as always, there's Nully, there's also Min Nully, I think. Yeah, it's a newer project that it's a minimal version of Nully. They promise better boot times. For now it's still in alpha, but yeah, there's a lot of options right there, and it might cost a lot less time than having to install one or two ports, if that's what you want. And this is mainly because like stock is now supposed to emulate newer games, right? Like the ports, all this time stock was just about emulating old games. So when the comparison was with that, it was just as simple as saying, yeah, if you want Portmaster, if you want new games, just go to custom firmware. But now stock is trying to compete on that as well, and I don't know if compete is the right word to use here, but from what I can see, the implementation of Portmaster on stock is not the best, and it would be really hard for people to find support now on that end. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's time for custom firmware. I do want to thank you for watching, and I do hope you subscribe, because this is my first video on this topic, and I hope to upload a lot more. I do accept any kind of criticism that you have. Like, go ahead and leave a comment if you think that there was any improvements that I should know, and Do my GitHub repository is still there, so if you think there's any scripts that you can improve to work on stock, go ahead and contribute, or feel free to make a pull request. Thank you for watching.